Sergeant Nora Wells opened her eyes and saw nothing but gray. The ceiling above her was metal. Cold and flat and gray. She lay still for a moment, listening. The air smelled strange, like burned wire and something older, something animal. A low hum came from the walls, steady and mechanical, the kind of sound that meant a room was sealed tight from the outside. She sat up slowly. The room was large. Much larger than she expected. The floor was smooth stone, dark and cold under her hands. The walls were thick metal plates bolted together, each one the size of a door. There were no windows. There was one entrance, a heavy door behind her, already sealed shut. A faint line of blue light ran along the edges of it, which meant it was locked from the outside and could not be opened from within. She had been in bad places before. 4 combat zones across 3 different planets. A field hospital that took direct fire for 6 hours straight. A crash landing on a moon with no atmosphere and only her kit and 2 other survivors. She knew what danger felt like. She knew the particular stillness that came just before something went very wrong. That stillness was in this room right now. Nora got to her feet carefully. She was still wearing her uniform. Her medical pack was still strapped to her back, which surprised her. Usually when someone locked you somewhere, they took your things first. She touched the strap with one hand just to confirm it was real. It was. She looked around the room properly for the first time. That was when she saw him. In the far corner, half hidden in shadow, something enormous was breathing. She could hear it now, slow, heavy pulls of air, each breath like the sound of a furnace working hard. 2 eyes opened in the dark. They were large. Very large. Each one the size of her closed fist, and they glowed a deep amber color, like coals that had been burning for a long time and were not close to going out. She had seen images of him before. Everyone in the Union had. His name was Drath, and he was on every military warning list in the known galaxy. He had destroyed 4 Union warships in a single engagement 12 years ago. He had walked through an entire battalion of soldiers on the planet Keth and come out the other side without slowing down. 17 different alien containment teams had tried to hold him. Every single one had failed. The Union had been trying to capture him for over a decade, and 6 months ago they finally had, but only because he had been wounded badly enough that even he could not keep fighting. They had put him here. In this room. And now they had put her in here with him. Nora stood very still and let herself understand the situation fully. She was a sergeant in the Union Medical Corps. She had no weapons. She had a medical kit, a uniform, and the training she had spent 11 years building. The creature in the corner was 3 times her height, covered in scales the color of deep space, and had killed more soldiers than most people could count on both hands. She noticed something else too. Even from across the room she could see that Drath was hurt. His left side, just below the base of his wing, was dark with dried blood. The color of the scales there was wrong, duller, flatter, the way a wound looks when it has been ignored for too long. His breathing was not steady. It was too quick and too shallow for a creature his size, which meant something inside his chest was not working the way it should. One of his back legs was resting at a slightly wrong angle, not broken but not right either. He was in serious pain. Nora had been a medic long enough to know that pain made dangerous things more dangerous. A wounded animal was worse than a healthy one. A wounded soldier was unpredictable in ways a healthy one was not. Whatever Drath was like on a normal day, right now, hurting and locked in a gray room, he was at his most volatile. She knew all of this. She understood it clearly. She also could not stop herself from assessing the injuries. It was simply the way her mind worked. It had always been that way even as a child. She saw hurt things and her brain immediately started asking questions. How bad? How long? What needs to happen first? Drath moved. It was not a large movement, just a shift of weight, a slow turn of his great head in her direction. But the sound of it filled the room. Scales against stone. The low creak of something ancient and heavy adjusting itself. His eyes fixed on her fully now, both of them bright and sharp and burning. When he spoke, the sound came from deep inside his chest and moved through the air like something physical. "Come closer, human," he said, "and I will end you before you take the next step." His voice was low and rough, like 2 large stones being dragged across each other. There was no emotion in it. No anger even. Just a simple statement of fact, the way someone might say it is raining outside or the door is locked. He was not threatening her for pleasure. He was simply telling her the truth as he understood it. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she unstrapped her medical pack, set it down in front of her on the floor, and lowered herself until she was sitting cross-legged on the cold stone. She pulled the pack open and began checking her supplies one by one, laying each item out to the side in a neat line. Drath watched her. She did not look up. Outside, behind a wall of thick observation glass that neither of them could see from inside the room, a group of Union officials stood watching on monitors. There were 9 of them. Senior staff mostly. A few military advisors. One woman with a recording device who was writing everything down. They had designed this situation carefully. They had chosen Nora Wells from a list of candidates because her file showed she was calm under pressure and worked well in isolation. They wanted to observe how a human behaved when placed in a genuinely hopeless situation. They wanted data. Clean data, gathered under controlled conditions. Not one of them had considered the possibility that she would simply sit down and start working. One of the military advisors leaned toward the monitor and frowned. "What is she doing?" he said. Nobody answered him. Nora finished laying out her supplies. She looked across the room at Drath. He had not moved. He was still watching her with those burning amber eyes, still and silent as something carved from rock. She took one slow breath. She had been in bad places before. She had been afraid before. Right now, her hands were not entirely steady and her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. But she was still a medic. And Drath was still bleeding. Those 2 facts sat in her mind simply and clearly, and no amount of fear was going to change either one of them. She picked up her kit and looked at him steadily. "I can see you are hurt," she said. "I would like to help. If you will let me." The room was very quiet. Drath did not move. He did not speak either. He simply stared at her with those large amber eyes, and the silence in the room stretched out long and heavy, like a held breath. The hum of the walls continued. The faint blue light along the sealed door continued. Everything else was still. Nora did not look away. She did not step forward yet. She just held her kit in both hands and waited. The way she had learned to wait in field situations where moving too fast was the same as moving wrong. Then Drath exhaled slowly through his nose. 2 thin lines of smoke curled up from his nostrils and faded into the air above him. "You are not moving," he said. "No," Nora said. "I told you I would kill you." "You did," she said. "I remember." "Then why," he said very slowly, "are you still standing there?" Nora considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. She was not the kind of person who answered quickly just to fill silence. She thought about it for a moment and then she answered honestly. "Because you are hurt," she said. "And I am a medic. And one of those 2 things is something I can actually do something about." Drath stared at her. In 312 years of living, he had been spoken to in many ways. He had been screamed at. He had been threatened. He had been begged and bargained with and reasoned at by diplomats who thought their words were special. He had been ordered by Union commanders who believed their rank meant something to him. He had been studied by scientists who spoke about him as if he could not hear them. Nobody had ever spoken to him the way this woman was speaking to him right now. Simply. Directly. Without any fear hidden underneath the words, or at least without letting the fear change what she said. He did not know what to do with it. "Come closer," he said, "and you will die." "I heard you the first time," Nora said. "I am going to sit back down now. I'm not going to come any closer until you say it is acceptable. I just want you to know what I can see from here." She sat down again the same way as before. Cross-legged on the cold floor, kit open in front of her. She looked at him carefully and she spoke in the same plain, level voice she used when briefing a patient on their own condition. "The cut on your left side has been open for at least 2 days. It is deep enough that the outer layer sealing over it is not enough. There is likely damage underneath that has not been treated. Your back left leg is dislocated, not broken, which is better but still needs to be reset or it will cause more problems over time." She paused. "The most serious thing is your breathing. It is too fast and too tight for a creature your size. That usually means fluid is building up near the lung. If that is what it is, and I believe it is, it will get worse on its own. It will not get better." Another pause. "If it is not drained, you will not survive another full day." The room was very quiet after she said that. Drath's eyes had not moved from her face the entire time she was speaking. There was something in his expression that was hard to read, not anger exactly or not only anger. Something else underneath it. "The Union doctors examined me," he said at last. His voice was lower now. Less like grinding stone and more like stone settling. "I know," Nora said. "Their report said you were stable. I read it before they put me in here. You read my medical file. I read everything available. I always do. And you believe they were wrong." "I believe," she said carefully, "that they examined you quickly from a distance without getting close enough to do it properly. Because getting close to you is not easy. I understand why they did it that way. But it means they missed things." Drath was silent for a long time. She waited. She was good at waiting. One of her earliest instructors had told her that the most important skill a field medic could have was patience, and that most people who washed out of the program did so not because they lacked medical knowledge but because they could not hold still long enough to let a situation develop. Nora had always been able to hold still. It was possibly the one thing that had saved her life more often than any piece of equipment in her kit. "Why?" Drath said at last. "Would you tell me this?" "Because you deserve to know your own condition," she said simply. "I am your enemy. You are a patient," she said. "Those are different things." He made a sound, low and deep, somewhere between a growl and something that was not quite a growl. It was the sound of something thinking, she decided. Working something through. "If I let you close," he said slowly, "you could use the opportunity to harm me. A needle in the right place. Poison in the bandage. The Union has tried such things before." "Yes," Nora said. "They have. I know that." She reached into her kit and held up the hollow drainage needle, the surgical adhesive, the antiseptic, each one in turn so he could see clearly what she was holding. "Everything I have is here in front of you. I will not put anything near you that I have not shown you first. You can watch every single thing I do. If at any point you want me to stop, I will stop." She set each item back down in its place. "I am not here to finish what the Union started," she said. "I am here because someone put me in this room and I am going to do the only useful thing I know how to do." Drath looked at her for a long time. The amber glow of his eyes was steadier now than it had been when she first saw them in the dark. Less like fire and more like lamplight. She could hear his breathing. Still too fast. Still too shallow. Whatever was building near that lung was not waiting for him to make a decision. "You said you would not come closer," he said, "until I told you it was acceptable." "That is correct," she said. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. She counted 12 full seconds of it. Then Drath lowered his great head, slowly, the way something very large moves when it is choosing to move carefully rather than being forced to, until his chin was resting on the stone floor. His eyes stayed on her. He did not look away. But he was lower now. And his tail, which had been held rigid behind him since she first saw him, relaxed slightly against the ground. He did not say yes. But he did not say no. And Nora Wells, who had learned a long time ago that in the field, not no was sometimes the best yes you were going to get, picked up her kit and began to move toward him slowly. She moved slowly. Every step was careful and deliberate. Nora had learned early in her career that approaching a patient who was frightened or in pain required a particular kind of movement. Not slow in a way that looked nervous. Slow in a way that looked certain. There was a difference, and patients, human or otherwise, could always feel it. Nervousness made things worse. Certainty made things quieter. She stopped about 2 meters from him and crouched down so she was lower to the ground. This was partly practical and partly deliberate. She needed to be at the right height to work. But she also knew that making herself smaller, physically, sent a message that no words could send quite as clearly. She was not a threat. She was just here to work. Drath watched her with unblinking eyes. His head was still resting on the floor. His breathing was audible from here, too fast, too tight, each breath slightly harder than the last. She could see his side rising and falling with the effort of it. She spoke as she worked, quietly and without stopping. Not to fill the silence. Not because she was nervous. She had found, over many years, that talking while treating helped. It gave the patient something to follow. It meant nothing was happening to them that they did not know about first. It kept them present and calm in a way that silence sometimes did not. "I am going to start with the fluid near the lung," she said. "That is the most urgent thing. I'm going to use a hollow needle. It is long. I need you to stay as still as you can. This will feel like pressure first and then relief. It will not feel good, but it will feel better than it does right now." Drath said nothing. But his eyes followed her hands. She found the right place on his side, just below the damaged area where the scales were thinner and the tissue underneath was accessible. She had done this procedure many times on human patients. She had done it twice on large alien patients. The principle was the same regardless of the size of the body. Find the correct point. Enter at the correct angle. Move slowly and steadily. Do not rush. She inserted the needle. Drath made a sound. Low and sharp, deep in his chest, the kind of sound that was not quite a word and not quite a growl but somewhere between the two. His claws pressed against the stone floor and she heard the scrape of them. "Still," she said quietly. "I know. Stay still." He stayed still. The fluid came slowly at first and then faster. Dark and thick. Too much of it, which confirmed what she had suspected from across the room. This had been building for 2 days at least, possibly longer. She worked steadily, keeping the angle consistent, keeping her hands from shaking through pure concentration and long practice. Then she heard it. A change in his breathing. It happened gradually over about 4 minutes. The breaths became slower, deeper. The tight, strained quality began to ease. One breath, then another, each one a little more like the breathing of something that was not fighting its own body just to take in air. Drath exhaled. Long and slow. The smoke from his nostrils was thinner than before. Better, she said. It was not a question. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. She removed the needle carefully and sealed the entry point with antiseptic and a pressure patch. Then she moved to the wound on his side. This part took longer. The cut was deep. Deeper than it had looked from across the room, which was saying something because it had looked very deep from across the room. She cleaned it in layers, working from the inside out, using the antiseptic thoroughly and without rushing. There were things growing in the lower part of the wound that should not have been there. The beginning of an infection, still early enough to deal with but not something that would have waited much longer. She used the bone seal tool on the lower layers, the setting turned all the way down to its minimum output. The tool was designed for large alien anatomy, but she was careful with it anyway. She explained every step before she did it. This layer I am closing now with a sealing tool. You will feel heat. It will pass in a few seconds. Drath's jaw tightened. She could see the muscles in his face working. But he did not move. He did not make a sound. He simply endured it the way she suspected he endured most things, by deciding he would and then doing it. She used every bandage she had for the outer layer. They were almost too small. She overlapped them carefully and pressed each one firm, working her way along the length of the wound methodically. When she reached the end, she sat back and looked at it. Not perfect, but clean, sealed, and properly covered for the first time since it had been made. The leg was last. She sat beside it and studied the joint carefully before she touched it. A dislocation on a creature this size was different from one on a human body, but the mechanics were the same. The joint needed to go back into its correct position. There was no gentle way to do that. The only way was to do it correctly and do it quickly. She looked up at Drath. This is going to hurt more than the other things, she said. More than anything else I have done tonight. I need you to know that before I do it. I'm sorry that it will hurt. But it needs to happen, and doing it fast is kinder than doing it slowly. Drath looked at her steadily. Do it, he said. She did. Took 3 seconds. She set the joint with both hands and every bit of strength she had, clean and fast and in the correct direction. Drath made no sound at all. But both his front claws drove straight down into the stone floor and left 4 deep grooves in it, the way a pen leaves a mark in paper. Then it was done. She sat back. Her arms ached from the shoulder down. Her knees hurt from hours on stone. She pressed the back of her hand against her forehead and took a long breath. Drath's leg was straight. His side was sealed. His breathing was deep and even and steady. He lowered his head. Not just to the level of his chest this time, but all the way down until his chin rested on the floor directly in front of her, the way it had been when he first let her approach. Except this time it was not a reluctant concession. It was something else. Something quieter. He looked at her from that low angle, those amber eyes steady and calm, the fire in them softer than it had been. You are a very strange creature, he said. I have been told, Nora said. Outside the observation glass, not one of the 9 Union officials was speaking. They had stopped talking some time ago. Nobody could have said exactly when, and now they simply stood in front of their monitors in silence, watching a human woman pack up her medical kit beside the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. One of them, the woman with the recording device, had stopped writing. She was just watching too. The second day began quietly. Nora had slept on the floor, her back against the wall, her medical pack under her head as a pillow. It was not comfortable. The stone was cold and the light in the room never fully went dark. A dim gray glow stayed on through the night, steady and flat. But she had slept in worse places. She had slept in active field hospitals with shells landing close enough to shake the walls. A quiet sealed room was manageable. When she woke, Drath was in the same position he had been when she finished treating him. Head lowered. Eyes open. Watching her the way he seemed to watch everything, completely, without blinking, without any part of his attention going somewhere else. His breathing was normal now. Deep and slow and even. The difference from the night before was significant enough that she noticed it immediately, the way a medic always notices the things that have changed in a patient overnight. His color was better too. The scales around the treated wound had lost that dull, flat look and were closer now to the deep black of the rest of him. He was recovering. Faster than she had expected, honestly. Whatever dragons were made of, it healed well when given the chance. "How is the pain?" she asked, the way she asked every patient every morning. Direct and simple. Drath considered the question as if it was more complicated than it sounded. "Reduced," he said at last. "The leg. Stiff. But correct." "That will ease over the next day," she said. "Try not to put full weight on it yet." He looked at her steadily. "You speak to me as if I am one of your soldiers." "I speak to you the way I speak to all my patients," she said. "Is that acceptable?" He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not a smile, she was not sure his face was built for smiling, but something in the same direction. "It is acceptable," he said. They talked for a while after that. Not about important things at first. She asked how long he had been in containment. He told her 6 months. She asked if they had given him enough food. He said enough to keep him alive, which was not the same thing as enough. She noted that down mentally and thought about whether she had anything in her kit that could help with that, which she did not, but the habit of noting things was not one she could turn off. Then he asked her something she had not expected. "Why did you become a medic?" She looked at him. In 11 years of service, senior officers had asked her that question as part of evaluations. Researchers had asked it as part of studies on human behavior under stress. Nobody had ever asked it the way Drath asked it, simply with what seemed like genuine interest in the actual answer. "My younger brother was hurt badly when I was 12, she said. "A bad accident. The medic who treated him at the scene kept him alive long enough to get to a hospital. I watched her work and I thought, that is the most useful thing a person can be. Someone who keeps the ones that can be kept." Drath listened without interrupting. "Your brother?" he said when she finished. "He survived." "He did," she said. "He teaches mathematics now. He is very bad at it by all accounts, but he enjoys it." Something moved in Drath's eyes. Not amusement exactly. Something adjacent to it. They sat in a quiet that was different from the quiet of the first night. The first night the quiet had been tense, like a wire pulled tight. This quiet was easier. It had room in it. Then the door opened. The sound was enormous in the stillness. The heavy lock disengaging, the hiss of the seal releasing, the grind of the door swinging inward on its heavy frame. Nora was on her feet before the door was fully open, her body moving the way it moved in the field, immediately, without waiting to understand the situation first. 6 soldiers came through the door in a line. Full combat gear. Weapons raised and active, the charge indicators on each one glowing red. Behind them came a man in a gray administrative coat, tall and thin, with the particular expression of someone who had made a decision they considered final and was here to carry it out. His name badge said Senior Administrator Gren. He looked at Nora. He looked at Drath. Something moved across his face when he saw Drath's condition. Not relief, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalculation, the look of someone whose expectations have not been met and who is now adjusting his plans accordingly. "The experiment is concluded," he said. His voice was flat and professional. "Sergeant Wells, step away from the creature and move to the left side of the room." Nora did not move. "Step away, Sergeant." "He has a name," she said. Gren looked at her with the expression of someone who had not anticipated having to repeat himself. "I am not going to." "Union Medical Code," Nora said. Her voice was level and clear. Section 9, Paragraph 4. No patient currently under the active care of a registered union medic may be subjected to termination proceedings while that care is ongoing. I am a registered medic. He is my patient. I am invoking that code right now in this room in front of 6 witnesses. Gren stared at her. "That code," he said slowly, "applies to union citizens." "It applies to patients," Nora said. "Show me the line in Section 9 that restricts it to citizens. Show me the exact words." Gren opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Because the truth was that Section 9 did not say citizens. It said patients. It had always said patients. The person who wrote it had been a medic herself, a long time ago, and she had chosen that word deliberately and specifically. Gren knew the code well enough to know that Nora was correct, and the expression on his face showed the precise moment he confirmed it in his own mind. "This is not a standard situation," he said, trying a different direction. "A patient is a patient," Nora said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I am not moving." The 6 soldiers had not lowered their weapons. The red charge indicators still glowed. The room was very still. Then there was a sound. It was slow. It was heavy. It was the sound of something enormous gathering itself from the floor and rising, joint by joint, scale by scale, to its full height. It was the sound Nora imagined mountains would make if mountains ever decided to stand up. Drath rose. He did not open his wings. He did not roar. He did not make any aggressive movement at all. He simply stood up to his full height, which brought his head close to the ceiling, and he stepped forward, one careful step then another, until he was standing directly behind Nora. Not over her. Not in front of her. Beside her. The 6 soldiers stepped back without meaning to. It was not a decision. It was simply what their bodies did when something that large moved toward them. Gren had gone very pale. Drath looked at him from his full height. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Quieter than Nora had heard it. Which somehow made it more serious, not less. I have not stood beside anyone, he said, in 300 years. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Nobody in the room moved. The hum of the walls continued. The red charge indicators on the weapons continued to glow. But not one of the 6 soldiers raised their aim, and Gren did not give another order, and the room stayed exactly as it was, frozen in a moment that none of them had been trained for and none of them knew how to end. On the monitors outside, the footage was already transmitting. Nobody gave an order to transmit the footage. That was the part that the Union could never fully explain afterward. The cameras in the containment room were connected to the internal monitoring system, which was connected to the facility's main data network, which had an automatic broadcast function that was supposed to be switched off during sensitive operations. Someone had forgotten to switch it off. Or perhaps someone had chosen not to. Nobody ever admitted to which one it was. Either way, by the time Senior Administrator Gren was still standing pale and silent in that room with 6 soldiers who had not moved and a dragon who had not moved and a medic who had not moved, the footage was already going out live across the facility's external channels. And from there it spread. It spread the way things spread when they are the kind of thing people cannot stop watching. One station picked it up. Then 3 more. Then a news network on the nearest inhabited station saw it on the smaller channels and pulled it into their main feed. Within 2 hours it was on 47 Union broadcast stations simultaneously. Within 4 hours it had been viewed more times than the Union Communications Office could accurately count. People watched Nora sitting on the floor of a gray cell, calmly laying out her medical tools in front of the most feared creature in the galaxy. They watched her walk toward him slowly when he did not say no. They watched her work for 2 hours without stopping, her hands steady, her voice quiet and constant, explaining every single thing she was doing before she did it. They watched Drath lower his great head to the floor while she treated him. They watched his breathing change. They watched the moment his claws stopped pressing into the stone and simply rested there. They watched the soldiers come in on the second day. They watched Nora stand up and not move. They watched her cite Section 9, Paragraph 4, in a flat and certain voice to a man who clearly did not expect to be cited at. And they watched Drath rise. They watched him step forward and stand beside her without a word, and they heard him say in that low and quiet voice that he had not stood beside anyone in 300 years. Then they watched the room stay frozen. And they could not stop watching. The Union High Council convened an emergency session 4 hours after the footage began broadcasting. It was not a calm session. There were raised voices and competing opinions and a significant amount of time spent on the question of whether Section 9 actually applied in this situation, which it did, as 3 separate legal advisors confirmed within the first 40 minutes. There was also a considerable amount of time spent on the question of what the public reaction meant for Union policy going forward, which was a more complicated question and one that took considerably longer. But in the end, 2 decisions were made. The first was that Sergeant Nora Wells and the creature known as Drath were to be released from the containment facility immediately. No charges. No further testing. No additional proceedings of any kind. The second was that Senior Administrator Gren and the 2 officials directly above him who had designed and approved the experiment were suspended from their positions pending a full internal review. The decisions were announced publicly, which was unusual. The Union did not typically announce internal disciplinary actions. But the Communications Office had looked at the viewing numbers and decided that unusual times required unusual choices. Nora was told about the decision by a young staff member who came to the door of the containment room alone, without soldiers, and spoke to her through the intercom in a voice that was noticeably more careful and respectful than the voice Gren had used. She listened to everything he said. She asked 2 questions, whether Drath would be released at the same time as her, and whether there were any conditions attached to the release. The young staff member confirmed that yes, both of them would be released together, and no, there were no conditions. Nora nodded once. Then she turned and told Drath. He had been listening already. The intercom was not especially quiet. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her with those amber eyes and she could not entirely read what was in them. Something old and complicated and not entirely comfortable, The way freedom looks to something that has been contained long enough to half forget what it felt like. Together, he said. Together, she confirmed. The outer doors of the facility were large, built to accommodate equipment and cargo rather than people, and they opened slowly. The light that came in was real light, wide and pale, and it fell across the floor of the corridor in a long flat rectangle that grew as the doors moved. Nora walked out first. The air outside was cool and open and smelled like nothing in particular, which after 2 days of ash and metal and old blood was the finest smell she had encountered in recent memory. She stopped just outside the doors and took a long breath. Behind her, slowly, came Drath. He had to angle himself sideways to fit through the doors. Once through, he straightened to his full height and stopped. He stood very still for a moment, his eyes moving across the open space around him. The pale sky, the wide ground, the distant line where the facility's outer boundary fences stood. A group of facility staff had gathered at a distance. Not close. Nobody was standing close. But they were there, maybe 30 people, standing in a loose and quiet group, watching. Nobody cheered. Nobody spoke. They simply watched, the way people watch something that they do not have the right words for yet. Drath spread his wings. He did it slowly, fully, without rushing. The span of them was enormous, each one wide enough to cast a shadow over a significant portion of the ground below. He held them out for a long moment, and Nora, standing nearby, saw something in his face that she had not seen there before. Something that looked like relief. He folded them again. Then he turned and looked down at her. "I owe you a life," he said. "You do not," she said. "I was doing my job." "By dragon law," he said, and his voice had that quality it got when he was not going to be moved on something. "A life given is a life owed. You gave me mine. The debt is real whether you accept it or not." Nora looked at him for a moment. She had learned over the past 2 days that arguing with Drath when he used that particular tone was approximately as productive as arguing with a wall. A very large, very old wall with amber eyes. "What does dragon law say the debt looks like?" she asked. "Protection," he said simply. "From this day Nora Wells is under my protection. Any who threaten her answer to me. This is not a favor. It is a fact." Somewhere in the gathered crowd, someone was writing that down. Within the hour it was on every channel that had been carrying the footage. Within the day it had been repeated and discussed and argued over on stations from one end of the mapped galaxy to the other. Commentators talked about what it meant for Union policy toward non-citizen species. Politicians argued about the legal implications of a dragon declaring personal protection over a Union soldier. Military advisors wrote long reports about the strategic complications. Draft did not read any of it. Nora went back to work. There were patients waiting. There were always patients waiting. She picked up her kit and she went to them the same way she always had. The galaxy had put 2 beings in a locked room expecting fear and violence and a simple, clean ending. What it got instead was something it did not have a category for. Something it would spend a long time trying to name and never quite manage to. 2 beings who had chosen, each in their own way, to do the harder thing. And a gray sealed room that the Union quietly decommissioned 3 weeks later, because nobody could agree on what to do with it, and nobody wanted to go inside it anymore. It felt, somehow, like it belonged to them.